Episode 2 of the 81-year-old Mira, which was supposed to be only one episode. Welcome back to the shop and the channel. Since I announced in my last video that this is going to have to be 2 to 3 episodes, there might be some continuity errors involved. That's okay. We can live with that. We're adults here. Well, maybe. Anyhow, so let's get on with the restoration of the 81-year-old Mira. Now we're at the point where I've got the joints cleaned out. I removed the splines. They were not glued in very well, and they were solid wood. See? There you go. So they had grain going 45 degrees. Or 90 degrees to this 45 degrees, so there were weak points. The spline slots are 3/16 of an inch wide, and it's an L. So I'm going to replace the hardwood splines, which I don't know really if they're hardwood or not, but these splines with plywood splines because they got grain strength in several directions. This is now ready to go back together, slowly and carefully, back together. Yeah, I got to clean up just clean up the miters a little bit because they've got some slight damage to them. But so the first thing I need to do is glue on this piece that came off over here on the crown, and then go from there. So I will clean up my mess, all my tools here, and we'll move on to start putting this thing back together and hang it on the wall. It's going into my wife's sewing room, which is like the third bedroom in the house. I mean, the second bedroom is her office, the third bedroom is her sewing room. So that's where it's going. Time to mix some epoxy. I've done the minor repairs that I needed to do. Places where wood was checked or cracked or split or needed to be glued together. The veneer needed to be glued back on, cleaning up all the joints so I can put this back together, which is what we're going to start now. I made 3 more splines because it needs 3 new splines. The spline on this end is actually intact, and with epoxy it's going to hold very nicely. So I have my epoxy, my wood flour, mixing bowl, mixers, and acid brushes for same. And in some places I may be using the pinner to hold things together. I got a clamp. So this is going to be one joint at a time. So basically I'm going to glue this piece back on after I cleaned it up so it would fit again. I'm going to epoxy this piece back on in place where it's supposed to be so that this corner here will be complete, and I can glue the rail back on, or stile back on, with the spline in place, the new spline in place. So let's get this started, and we'll start mixing up. Again, MAS Marine Epoxy. It's what I use. I've been using it for years. I buy it from Chesapeake Lightcraft up in Annapolis, not far from here. And not a sponsor, and neither is CLC. But this is a 2-to-1 mix, and the pumps are set to do 2-to-1. So 1 pump here, which is actually, and then 1 pump here. Oops, a little bit more because it's got some air in it. Ooh, I think I need to fix that. Okay, that's better. I need another container now because I put stuff in that one. These things are really nice. The epoxy doesn't stick to them, and when you're done and it's cured, you can just upside down and pop it, and the epoxy will pop out. So 1 squirt here and 1 squirt here. So one squirt here is 2 of these squirts here. And now we mix it up. The wood flour. Something I have to say is I made an error in my previous segment regarding the Dunlop broadsides of the Declaration of Independence that were printed in 1776. So they were actually printed on July 4th in 1776, and the date July 4th is emblazoned across the top of the Dunlop broadside. And the significance of that, it's when we celebrate the independence. But historically, we declared our independence on July 2nd. The document was finished and ratified on July 2nd. In fact, there's a quote from John Adams and a letter to his wife stating the 2nd of July will become a great celebratory day in America, for basically forever. But it looks like we celebrate our independence on July 4th because on the Dunlop broadsides, which was read in every town square and in churches and everywhere in the country, in the 13 colonies, said July 4th on it, right, blazoned right across the top. So yeah, that's one of those little history factoids I like. All right, so now I've got it mixed up. I add the wood flour, and yes, as I stated in an earlier video, it is flour that it is wood, sawdust, and fibers, the consistency of flour. And it's used as a thickening agent, and it adds a little strength to the joint. And what I want is stiff peanut butter. Not loose peanut butter this time, but I want stiff peanut butter because I don't want any of this to run anywhere. So mixy mix. A little bit more. So if you come across a Dunlop broadside and it's been verified by Christie's or one of the other great auction houses, you will find that it's worth, I think the last one sold for, well, I know the one in Pennsylvania sold for $2.something million, and that was years ago. So who knows what it would go for now. Like I said, I think only 20 are known to exist. That's just about the consistency I want. Let me get it all blended in. Yep. So now I've got the consistency I want. And I'm going to use the acid brush so I can limit the amount that I actually put down. And where's the part? Here's the part. So the thickening agent, like I said, keeps it from running and it fills the gaps. I'll do more of a close-up on a later joint. Make sure it's all lined up. Yes. Oops, slipped. That's what the pinner is here for. Okay, that's it. Now I leave it alone and let it cure. Now, what I have in stock for my epoxy is the slow cure hardener, and I use slow cure because before the shop had HVAC, it got awful hot in the summertime, and when you heat epoxy up, it kicks real quick. So I got the slow cure specifically to deal with that. And so it's going to take a while, so I'll be back at a later time and start another segment. We'll do this joint, then we'll do this joint over here, which has the leg already attached to it, and then we'll put the bottom on, but and this side over here, this one, and we'll be using a square to make sure that the everything is square to everything, so the mirror will go in without issue. So I'm going to let that sit. This will tell me when it's cured, and so next step is, I believe, going to be that joint right there. That's on there very nicely, and the spline fits It's snug in one spot. I've got to clean that up a little more glue in there. But the spline fits, that's important. So I got my square out this time. Going to put on, as I said earlier, I'm going to put this one on. And this is going to be a little more interesting because I have to make sure that the piece is laying relatively flat. Yeah, so, and then this has to come in place, and then I have to glue and pin, and I want to shim the front of this so because if you look at this, the crown here is taller, the curve here is taller than this, but that's about, yeah. So I have to shim that a little bit and make sure that it's straight, because if I put it down like that, this is not going to be straight. So I got to shim this, and I also have to shim this to make sure it's at the right height. So let me get some shimmy things together and make some shims. Playing cards. These make great shims in the workshop. Believe me, I've used them for a lot of things. Let me get out a bunch here. No, not quite. Give me a bunch more. Get that level. And okay, that's it. So that's a bunch of cards. And now I want to bring this up about the same amount, like so. And I think that's about to do it. That's going to do it. Again, this is going to get epoxied together, and then I'm going to use the pinner to pin some things. Let me bring this over here. Pin it so that it'll hold together while the epoxy cures. And I got to hand fit it several times to make sure I know where it's going to go. I mean, epoxy gives you a lot of working time. That's one of the reasons for using it for projects like this. But it gives you a lot of working time. Excuse me, I need more gloves. And this is, again, one of those kind of tedious, it's not so much tedious, but finicky pieces of work that I need to do. Now, I've got a new one, because this one hasn't reached a full cure. Once it reaches a full cure, I can pop out the epoxy that's in there. Let's see how this is going to work here. Yep, see, air. I need a new pump on this side. That's what I need. So, one pump of the hardener, one pump of the resin. I've got more pumps in the drawer, but I just haven't got them out. For those who don't know, this is not polyester resin, it's epoxy resin. It has almost no smell at all. It's very slight, and it's not ugly. Unlike polyester resin, which we used to use years ago, which stinks to all get out. And boats were made out of back in the day. I don't know if they still are. Fiberglass boats, that is. Okay, now on to the wood flour. Okay, now this I'm going to dab on with the stick because of where it needs to go. There's a lot of space. Okay, now let's put it together. And since this is almost self-aligning, we'll double check. Looks pretty good. Oops, got a mistake. Got to fix the mistake. It means I got to take it apart. And now, let's put it all back together again, like that. And I'll pin it at one end here. Now it'll give me a little fastening there. And then I can flip it over, double check this joint here, and pin that there. And there it is. A bit of a fight, but nonetheless, we got it done. So now I can pin the rest of it. Okay. Well, that was an adventure, wasn't it? I finally got the joint set up to where I want it. And I got to, again, I let the epoxy cure and then move on to the spline joints, which is just the remaining 3 corners. And they have the splines, and it should be a little easier because I'll do all 3 of those at the same time and then line everything up flat on the bench, and it should go together fairly nicely. Anyhow, so that's next. Gonna do the remainder of this frame next. Well, obviously now there's going to be a 3rd episode. So I'll get that done, and until then, make great things out of wood.